we now move on to the first paper session of the day. This is paper session 4, current development in mapping, an overview. And I'm excited about our first talk within this section, given by Alex Moltzau, Ricardo Chavarriaga, Vincent Mai, and Carl Maria Mörch. So just a quick reminder, the 2010 rule applies, and I will signal you, and you can say a bit about yourself if you want to. So, floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marius. My name is Alex Moltzau, and I have a combined background in social science and programming. So this strange field of social data science. Let's see, I'll just start my presentation now. As you can see from the title, it's changed a little bit, as is sometimes the case with preliminary work. But I'm going to talk about mapping ethics and sustainability in AI and analysis of the public available information on these websites of the sort of AI institutes of these top-ranked AI researchers. So before, I've been really interested in like these different AI institutes around the world, and you know, I did some work in just like mapping them out. For example, in Europe, there's this CLAIRE network, and I became kind of increasingly fascinated with the information that is available on these websites and how these institutions communicate. This kind of question arises about how are terms related to sustainability and ethics communicated. So can we find AI institutes that focus on sustainability? To highlight the work, maybe? Can we find aspects of sustainability that they focus on? And is there any way to kind of make this navigational information more easily accessible, perhaps for researchers that want to find each other or research groups that are interested in different kinds of work? And then like how to make that mapping effort sustainable over time in a way. So first we thought we would have a look at the Nature 100, but it became also a question of that there were some problems with this sampling because experts in the field of AI did not immediately recognize this contribution of, so they might have been like a bit kind of aggregated, and we didn't really find like the unit of analysis that we wanted to, which was these AI institutions. So we thought maybe we could sample based on institutes on AI conferences. So in a way, kind of finding these different conferences and kind of figure out kind of contributions and then think about institutions in that manner. But for now, we decided to kind of look at this guide to research. And this is not based on AI conferences, but age index, Google Scholar citations, so on and so forth. You know, it can be challenge, of course, but so going from individual to institute in a way to make this list of researchers linked to individual research groups or lab. Questions of gender equity, like diversity, could be maybe raised as well in terms of how we approach this or how we would make up this this distribution too. And then, so thinking about our sample and like how do we approach these definitions and taxonomies, and there have been talks about this already at this conference, and I think this is something that we will have to adjust to and take into consideration and see kind of how we can be inspired by these other projects that are going on. The Sustain Index, very interesting yesterday, and I think there are several other projects that we could kind of go to. So we could of course go like to the EU taxonomy for but it's more like oriented and operationalized for finance, and maybe it doesn't take this inequality and then gender as much into consideration. But so our approach is this sort of like qualitative, quantitative kind of combine. And I think Louise Hickman's work was really interesting in the sense of like thinking about these different networks. But for us, it's a sense these hyperlink networks, so these different websites, and then how as well we can think about how we can kind of gain some understanding of what these different institutions focus on, or like what they say they focus on publicly, right? But in kind of doing this issue mapping, we need to work more on that, like detailed semantic context, previous studies. As I said, we might have gained some possible links there just by attending this community as well and this conference. But also there are the kind of different automated ways as well now of kind of analyzing sustainability reports. There was another talk about this yesterday too by Henrik Skaugsætra, I believe. But it's possible to kind of think about how to use natural language processing as well to kind of analyze these different institutes to some extent. So one big inspiration is the work of Anders Munch, and this kind of like qualitative and quantitative aspects. So here he kind of built a web corpus of food-related websites. So this was a manually built corpus, and sort of like visualized with Gephi. And I think, you know, although it shows associations, you know, it's not what was said as well is that, you know, we cannot necessarily kind of just infer based on what we see, but we have to kind of dig a bit deeper. We have to think about this qualitative aspect of what we find and like how we can look at it. So just like a broader question is, what could a hyperlink network of 2000 AI related labs look like? I mean, and what could it be used to explore? You know, sustainability and AI ethics, and the explicit focus on this is one thing. But I think like the example of Louise Hickman this morning on disability is, you know, I think it's a really pertinent question as well of thinking about, you know, perhaps AI institutions and what do they say about this topic. So I mean, of course, if we did have like a manually coded hyperlink network, and if we did have that information, then I think it would be interesting to see kind of what other aspects we could explore with this information too. But we're not there yet. The kind of current number is 82, whereas 42 explicitly mentions sustainability. Fury with like explicit mention of AI ethics. And then when I say explicit, I mean like just that word, you know, that's kind of what we looked at just immediately before kind of trying to get all the information from each of the websites, just coding in that manner. But we could then, you know, think about, okay, if academic institutes like or centers or groups talk about mention sustainability on their websites, then kind of what do they talk about? So for example, Carnegie Mellon University Robotics Institutes, it's mentioned in the news section, and it's like bundled with other words in a specific news article. It's also shown like in a description of a person at the institute. And at Stanford, sustainability is kind of bundled a bit as well here, but it describes a person. And for MIT, it's in a news section, kind of mentioning a future event. So I mean, clearly this is a topic that is coming up, you know, maybe to a greater extent than has been the case before in the field of artificial intelligence. But increasingly as well, like this mention of actual research projects, and I'm really glad that that we're slotted next to Francesca Mazzi as well. That will be talking after this talk, because Oxford has kind of an initiative on mapping projects also. So here you can see sort of like an explicit sort of mention of sustainability in relation to projects, and that's of course quite interesting, and I think it would be great to explore that more. But clearly there are kind of limitations to this approach as well. So we're not tracing the full AI lifecycle, although we could see, for example, think about how lifecycle is discussed at all these different websites. If we had, like at this sample stage, but also like with a larger sample, but we wouldn't really be able to track the specific projects which others are doing. So, but there also isn't of like different definitions or terms that can mean rather a lot of different things, and people use terms in various ways. And then there's a question of like this, when people talk about sustainability, although we have made an issue list, we have to kind of think of how then we explore this topic of sustainability. I think the SDG initiatives from Oxford is kind of oriented a bit towards Rolnick with a paper there in regards to how to use machine learning to address the climate crisis. But I mean, of course, there's also a broader discussion of how we talk about sustainability in the field of artificial intelligence. I mean, and of course, like if we did have this kind of data set of links and also like of text from websites at different times, it would also be possible to think about other aspects like the governance of artificial intelligence, like standards, certifications. So I mean, of course, there's this limitations to kind of what can we infer from the surface, right? Because we are very much then at this surface, and then how do we dive down, and like what other people do we connect to, and so on and so forth. But one interesting aspect of this is like to think about the development. How will this discussion of sustainability in the field of artificial intelligence develop over the coming year? We could outline some possible hypotheses in this. Maybe we could see that there's an increased use of words related to sustainability and AI ethics in the coming year. Perhaps actors will redefine, use sustainability to describe existing projects or efforts to a greater extent. And could there be clearer plans, perhaps from academic institutes, on how to address sustainability? So whether we address kind of this aspect in exploring what can we see in terms of sort of specific plans, and what level will they be at? Will they kind of be on the level of the Sustainable Development Goals? Will they address the indicators within the goals? There was a really great talk yesterday again on thinking about how we actually address the indicators. I mean, it was more related to digitalization, but I think the question is still of like, how is this operationalized in the context of AI? And I think from that we could also see whether whether these plans change, because this is public information, and institutes are they have a role in sort of communicating this and disseminating this information, both for the public in general, but also for the wider research community to connect with what they do. Hopefully, like in the sense that mapping work as well could work as a way to assist in connecting people that are really interested in the field of sustainability, and perhaps finding some common interests, across, and like to connect with a diverse range of people from different places. So of course, like we've started out with this like quote unquote top institutes, but it's also possible to kind of go across like this wider landscape of academic institutes in the world, as an alternative list, and then see kind of how do they connect like what do these networks say, what kind of stories do they tell, but also kind of what happens when we dig a bit deeper down into discussions of ethics in AI. Will it be more linked to discussions of sustainability by these actors going ahead? So that's that's some kind of hypothesis, at least for us. And we're really really interested to learn more about this aspect. So I would also like to kind of thank the kind of current team or like the group of people, so to speak, that because Carl in a way said that we should kind of take this forward and like think a bit more about it, and then Vincent Mai and Ricardo Chavarriaga for being a bit more technical and like challenging like how we approach this AI aspect, but also others kind of who has helped to kind of start this journey. So I would like maybe to end slightly early, if that is okay, Marius, to get some more time for discussion and for questions. But regardless, really grateful to be here. I'm so happy that this community has kind of sprung up, and that this Sustainable AI conference is here, and that we could participate. So yeah, I've enjoyed the talk so much, but also look forward to the discussions and being challenged on like our thoughts, and our current progress.
Yeah, thank you very much. So to get right into it, speaking of challenges, what do you identify as main difficulty or main set of difficulties regarding your methodology? So what, I mean, you mentioned a couple. What are particular challenges in your mapping strategy and process?
So particular challenges, could relate to this relationship between like attempting to quantify information, but also attempting to think about this qualitative aspect. And like there's a lot of talk about bias in the field of AI, but I think it also we've figured out that like these technical ways to address bias, but also like the ways to address outcomes is really an important part of it. But for us specifically, I think this how do we kind of come together from different backgrounds, right? And that's always so great, and I think it's interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary work is really fun, but it's also very challenging because we might have different words that we think describe similar things, but when in fact we might kind of come from backgrounds and then talk with one specific words, and then we think it means one thing, but then the other party might think it means a different thing as well. But I think like in terms of methodology as well, it's important to say that even if we do build a hyperlinked network of AI institutes, it's still kind of we have to be kind of critical and skeptical to what we find. It might show some form of like associations, but we also have to think about like if we are to then see like if there are any ways to kind of build on further from that network as well, then to kind of think about like the curation or the pruning as well. Like if a lot of maybe like, is it interesting that like the different links to different sort of academic sites? Is it interesting, or are we more concerned with how the different institutes refer to each other? Or so in that sense, like it's a qualitative work, and that kind of poses some methodological challenges, but also like the whole aspect of collaborating with different researchers, which I think is like equally challenging, but also exciting. But also think about how we maybe can increase like the diversity, and like the different perspectives of the research group overall. So it was a long answer, but it was a really nice question, and thank you, Marius.
Yeah, thanks. So in this connection, there's a question regarding the sustainability and ethics issue dictionary. How do you deal with context? So this is a nice question, because there's this example used by this one professor back in my college days. He said, well, a poem can be about love without mentioning the term. So how do you track that? When you I think you mentioned it, but there's what do you do when you don't have, like, you don't get the terms on a silver platter, but rather you have to like find workarounds to identify the topic?
Yeah, I think this is like where the strength and the weakness of the qualitative approach, because to some extent, we can build this issue dictionary, and this is kind of what to some extent there has been attempts at doing. Like maybe we could build it based on how the discussions in sustainable development goals are structured, or within given indicators, and then we could think, oh, we can map based on that. But as you said, like there is this qualitative aspect to it. Like if we see a discussion of like life underwater, or like if we see a discussion of gender equality, and so how do we kind of then judge and categorize, like, this is the discussion of such and such goal, or like here we see a particular ethics discussion, and then related to this mention of ethics also on these different institutes, they talk about AI ethics, and they talk about human rights, maybe close to each other, or like maybe this is some kind of focus, at least when it comes to the public information. But I think that's, I mean, because it is manually curated, we can kind of go in and we can look at the context. Like I said, is it just a bundle of words, and that's very sort of like sustainability, I feel is often kind of thrown in, as this kind of extra word when you talk about like equity, inclusion, sustainability, and then it's sort of like it appears within a bundle. But it's not like detailed in the sense that it doesn't say much about how this is going to be addressed. So that's one from like this qualitative and like categorical perspective. But like secondly, there is this kind of like technical wish to place sustainable development goals and kind of then make them into boxes and then place projects into boxes, right? And I feel like this is kind of an exercise that is happening now as well, to go like this is a AI project and it fits into this given box, and like because it mentions so and so, it is a sustainable project that is like this given goal, right? So I think this is a really important effort, and like I think the speaker that will follow, it's great, because then we can try to see like if we think this is a sustainable project within artificial intelligence, then we can create discussions between these different projects, or we can create discussions about how what type of trade-offs we see when addressing these like goals, but also equally like the way that we categorize AI projects. I think that discussion will develop a lot over the coming year with the Sustain Index and like with other initiatives to kind of say like this is sustainable AI, right? Because somebody is it is now a process, right, of having the power to define what sustainable AI means, right? So equally, it is it's a discussion of the actors who are involved in these processes as well, and like what they then, how they choose to define sustainable artificial intelligence. So you're right, like in a way, like what we define now might change as well over the next year. So even if we do create definitions now, and then we say like we will start measuring it now, and then we will kind of see in 1 year how these mentions have changed, we could maybe still see that like the discussions and the words, they could be very different, and maybe they will be influenced as well by this definition work and indexing work and other types of approaches to what sustainable AI is supposed to be.
Great, thanks. You almost answered the next question, but since it's directly related, I still want to bring it in. So what about changes in the concept of sustainability? As the discussion about sustainability evolves, the concept may evolve too. And how to track such changes?
I think this is also where like the fourth aspect is really great, because we have some really focused like AI ethics researchers in our like little group, and it's really interesting as well to think about the relationship between AI ethics and sustainability in this sense, because I think there is all existing discussions of ethical approaches to AI, and now when this kind of increased focus on sustainability will be occurring, how does that relationship change? And we don't have any good answer to that question necessarily like now, or maybe we have an answer, but as you say, we can answer something now, but like in 1 year we might have a different answer. But I think then looking at those two different answers and then thinking about what has actually happened, and like thinking critically, but also maybe thinking positively of like how were good connections made, like how do we make these good projects within sustainability come to life? What do we learn from them? And I think there is so much to learn in the coming year of what sustainability will mean in the field of artificial intelligence.
Thanks. So the next question would be, given the changes, what conclusions can be drawn from an increase in use of words related to sustainability now? Can you say a bit more about this, or?
Yeah, I mean, of course we have to look at actually the context and how as we've talked about, how this more qualitative aspect changes, not only kind of if it's mentioned, but like how is it mentioned, and like we can infer things about that, but we should also like think about how these different AI institutes define themselves, right? Because you could definitely send out some surveys, or you could have like some interviews with different organizations to some extent, and I think like maybe we can learn more as well if we just like take this more closer approach to understanding, because like yes, these are websites, but if you if you talk to an academic institute, they're not always that good at displaying information. So I mean, so just that we see sustainability more might mean that some actors are like better at kind of then taking this sustainability concept and then bringing it into their public communication, right? So if we see an increased use of words, it might not necessarily mean that institute is more sustainable. I mean, that's not like we cannot like conclude that based on looking at like they mention sustainability more. Oh, they're more sustainable. That's like, but it's more like trying to look at the actors that mention sustainability more, and then thinking a bit more like about what that means and like what the increased use could mean. But it's also an interesting aspect of like, does it actually mean anything at all? Because we can say sustainability, but it's actually what do we do? How do we change it, or do we just relabel, or like do we just kind of repackage?
Thank you so much for all this helpful context and your exciting contribution to the issue of mapping. So this brings me to our next speaker. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, nice to have you here on the conference. Since it's already 11:30, I don't want to steal you any time, and will be brief. So Francesca Mazzi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marius. And I would like to thank also Amy, Larissa, and Jamila, I hope I pronounce it well, for organizing such a timely and much needed conference. I would also like to thank Alex and Luis, the speakers before me, and also the speakers from yesterday. It was very interesting to see all the developments in the field of AI and sustainability. Now, without further ado, I would like to talk about, to introduce you about on the Oxford Initiative on AI for SDGs. So first of all, the initiative was launched around 2 years ago by a group of researchers from the Oxford Internet Institute and the Said Business School, a multidisciplinary group of researchers that included, as it was mentioned a few minutes ago, people with a background in ethics, people with a background in computer science, and I joined the group myself last October 2020, and I have a background in law, so it's a quite of a multidisciplinary group itself. It started from looking at AI itself. What does make AI a socially good AI? So the first research that was done concerned how to build an AI that is by definition that can be, I mean, not by definition, but that has the essential factors to be defined a good and socially good AI. So the research group developed these 7 essential factors that are listed here that can be considered a good basis to start and to see from a technical perspective what makes AI good socially. And then there was the need to define what is AI for social good. So AI for social good was defined as the design, development, and deployment of AI systems in ways that help to prevent, mitigate, or resolve problems adversely affecting human life or the well-being of the natural world, or enable socially preferable environmentally sustainable developments while not introducing new forms of harm and or amplifying existing disparities and inequalities. Now, this is where the SDGs were selected as the assessment benchmark. Now, because we are talking about mapping today, the next step was to create a database of projects using AI for the Sustainable Development Goals. 5 inclusion criteria were developed, namely, well, that was in order to avoid, for example, projects that might have just mention AI without having practically used it yet, and to include projects that have had already a positive impact that was documented by being used for at least 6 months, and also projects with no or minimal evidence of counterindications or negative side effects. And in this way, 108 projects were identified. So they were identified based on existing database and also other repository of projects, such as, for example, the Fair Luck Observatory, which was developed by the Inter-American Development Bank. Now, starting from these 108 projects, the next step was studying them, how they were, where they were located, what were they addressing, which goals, and so on. So today we are going to focus on one aspect that came up from this analysis of projects, that is the unequal allocation of efforts. So the unequal allocation of efforts happen at different levels. So you can see from this image here that, for example, across the SDGs, there is a huge difference between goal 3, good health and well-being, which has a high number of projects, whereas, for example, the first and the last goals, so no poverty and partnerships for the goal, have a very low number of projects. Not only that, you can't see it from the image, but there is also an unequal allocation of efforts in terms of geographics. And there is a mismatch sometimes from where some actions in relation to certain goals might be needed or is needed, but where the projects are actually located. Another unequal allocation of efforts can be noticed within the same goal as well. So here you see from this image that relates to climate change, for example, that there is a difference between the efforts allocated towards electricity system and transportation. But also this is happening also in relation to other goals, such as good health and well-being, where obviously certain diseases or certain unmet medical needs are targeted more than others, depending on the geographical location and on the organization that created the AI projects. Now, the next step in terms of research was to ask ourselves why there is this unequal allocation of efforts. Asking why something happens is quite a challenging exercise, but it's also what research does. So we tried to phrase this macro question into two micro research questions, so in two different directions. On one side, we focus on what went well and what went wrong, starting from analyzing these projects that we already had access to, and on the other hand, how can we do more and better? So for what concerned the first direction, we aimed at developing best practices and lessons learned. And in terms of thinking about how can we do more and better, we thought about incentives. Now, in terms of best practices and lessons learned, we developed a survey that we submitted to the selected AI for SDGs projects that is aimed at obtaining information concerning, for example, regulatory, financial, technical, ethical opportunities and challenges, to understand a bit better what they experienced through the development of their projects. Now, this is a slide that is supposed to give you an idea of mainly, roughly, the topics that we touch upon. So with this survey, we considered the extent to which users were targeted, whether they were reached by the project, whether they were involved to provide feedback, whether there was an impact assessment in terms of both contribution to the goal and to impact in terms of impact on people's lives or on human rights, for example. Also, we evaluated, we wanted to understand better how the AI for SDGs projects experience the legal and regulatory frameworks around that they had to comply with, whether their AI for SDGs was human-centered, whether there was a human in the loop, whether the output of AI have a direct impact on users. So as you may see, a broad range of questions. Now, today I'm just going to share some of the results because of the next part of the presentation. So some of the results show that most projects could have used more funding, more governmental support, more data access and availability, and more interactions with governments and organizations and NGOs. And that leads us to the next direction that I introduced before, incentives. So now, obviously, when we speak about incentives, we could speak about a lot of incentives. We could speak about fiscal incentives and so on. But we are going to focus now on the patent system. Why that? So the patent system is a system of incentives for technological innovation. A patent is a document that is issued upon application by a government office or a regional office, which describes an invention and creates a legal situation in which the patented invention can normally only be exploited with the authorization of the owner of the patent. It means that basically, if I have a patented invention, I don't have a right to produce the invention, but I have the right to exclude others from producing it. Which means it gives me a monopoly on that. The protection is granted usually for 20 years. So we asked ourselves, does the patent system incentivize AI for SDGs? Can the patent system help incentivizing AI for SDGs in a more uniform way in order to address these gaps and discrepancies that we analyzed before? So we built our analysis starting from the strengths and the weaknesses of the patent system. So we have identified 5 strengths and 5 weaknesses. This is a work in progress research anyways. The strengths that we have identified are the following. First of all, the purpose of the patent system. The patent system is there in order to incentivize progress according to the US Constitution. And in general, this is the same in almost every country, to stimulate innovation that is beneficial for society. So obviously, if we consider the scope and the common understanding and the shared principles behind the SDGs, we can argue that the purpose of the SDGs and innovation in the field of the SDGs is in line with the purpose of the patent system. Also, the activities that are incentivized by the patent systems are those activities that would need to be incentivized in terms of AI for SDGs, because they are about the production of knowledge, R&D investments in the field of technology, diffusion of such technologies, and further innovation based on our technologies, which is exactly what we need in terms of AI for SDGs. The third strength concerns the type of international agreement that there is concerning patents. So the patent system is literally in almost every country, and there is an international agreement that is a minimum standard agreement. That is the TRIPS agreement. It's annexed to the World Trade Organization and was submitted by all the members of the World Trade Organization. So this means that it's a good structure in terms of global governance, considering the global scope of the SDGs. This kind of international agreement allows to have minimum standard and then tailored details that are tailored on the local needs. Also, the structure of the patent system is quite interesting because it was useful in terms of how it can be used by AI for SDGs, because it has patent offices and experts worldwide that are skilled and can dialogue between each other, even between among different countries. And also, patenting is usually linked with productivity and growth, which would be in line with the scope of the SDGs, if sustainable, of course. Now, moving quickly to the weaknesses, because I am concerned about time, there is a lack of definition of innovation in patent law. So we don't know exactly what kind of innovation we want to incentivize with the patent system. We do know that what we don't want to incentivize. So there is excluded subject matter, although no sustainability parameters are mentioned there. Also, some stakeholders of the patent system have some behaviors that have been largely discussed by academics concerning, for example, evergreening patent or patent trolls that actually stifle innovation and might also stifle innovation in the sense of AI for SDGs. Also, AI-related patents regulation is quite of a gray area because AI can be protected only if it has a technical effect, it solves a technical problem. And the patent laws, as they are now, they incentivize the disclosure to the public of downstream innovation, which is the result of AI, rather than the disclosure of AI itself. Also, the patent value depends on commercialization prospects, which obviously creates a problems in terms of how the patent system doesn't incentivize those goals that are not profitable. So, for example, no poverty, the use of AI for no poverty is not incentivized by the patent system. Also, patent rights are, as I mentioned before, exclusionary rights. So they exclude others from producing that specific invention, which means that in AI-driven innovation and data-driven innovation scenario, the collaborative efforts that might be very useful in terms of data sharing, in terms of open access, are actually stifled by the patent laws right now. So starting from there, we started to develop a governance, a potential new category of patent that builds on the weaknesses identified, but also on the strengths, because the use of the patent system would be definitely more efficient than establishing a new system of incentives for not only AI, but all the innovation in the field of SDGs. So we started developing this concept that is a work in progress of contribution patents. Now, contribution patents would build on a positive definition of innovation for that includes the principles of bioethics and the underlying values of sustainable developments. So it would focus on ideas or methods for development of products that respect the 5 principles of bioethics. Beneficence, and in this sense, it would be a contribution to one or more of the SDGs. Veracity, justice, autonomy, and non-maleficence, in the sense that it should not negatively impact other people, the environment, or other SDGs. So ideally, the WTO would adopt these principles and the basic legal requirements with a minimum standard agreement that is comparable to the one that I mentioned before, the TRIPS agreement. Now, the contribution patents would obviously have to build on what were identified before as the weaknesses of the patent system. So ideally, these contribution patents would have a non-exclusionary nature. So they would provide moral rights and access to financial resources based on the description of the idea or the method and the contribution plan eventually. Which would be composed of cost and impact assessment to measure the contribution and perform a transparent cost-benefit analysis. Now, ideally, the remuneration would be proportional to the contribution and would be subject to auditing procedures. The measurement of contribution would be harmonized in principles and tailored to local needs and details. And a global contribution patent records system should be created. In this sense, also, because the remuneration would be proportional to the contribution, collaborative efforts would be rewarded. Now, here I've just highlighted few of the pros and the cons. So obviously, this would need multidisciplinary resources, but to support the work of the patent offices and the patent examiners, so people from different fields. It would also have an impact, obviously, on the geopolitics of innovation. It would be based on a difference between scarcity of financial and natural resources, based on the idea that natural resources are scarce. So we need to have a proper plan or a proper hierarchy of values to address trade-offs, whereas financial resources would be by default provided by this system. Obviously, among the difficulties we should notice that it would be particularly important to weigh the contributions and to have a harmonized way to weigh the contributions to allow democratic participation and also to develop economic policies, for example, for what concerns inflation control. And I think my time is now over, so thank you very much.
So perfect. Thank you for your illuminating talk. Really exciting. Just let's get right into it. I think Alex was first, so I'll read his question to you. He posted in the chat. With the suggested database by EU, do you think we will see more policing of machine learning or AI patents? It has not been easy to identify infringing actors, but now it might be due to the increased organization and formalization of AI. This might become a new battleground for intellectual property lawyers. What does this mean for sustainability?
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Marius, for reading the question. So I believe that we are I'm speaking as an intellectual property lawyer, even though I don't practice, let's say, as an intellectual property academic. I believe that we are living a situation where the laws are following the societal phenomenon and the technological changes in a way that is slightly different from before. So usually the laws would follow the phenomenon and would run behind literally in order to address problems. Now, the approach of the legislator now, it's a bit different because if you notice, the AI regulation has a different approach. And it's less focusing on defining and categorize concepts or technologies that are running definitely too fast, but the legislator is trying to give methods and values in order to direct, in a way, innovation. And I believe this is an ongoing process that is definitely not finished yet and probably not even started in the way we will see it in a few years. But this, I think this has definitely some potential in terms of policing for machine learning and AI patents, in the sense that the way that legislator is acting is trying in a way to use AI itself to predict, let's say, what is going to happen, to direct the sense of innovation. So in this sense, I don't see it as a potential, let's say, battleground, but rather as a potential positive development of patent laws. So impact patent laws as well.
Thank you for this answer. The next question is, AI projects are used to address SDGs, but what about the sustainability of the projects themselves? I think a carbon footprint is the issue here.
Yeah, so a part of what I was describing before as contribution patent project was exactly concerning the trade-offs and the scarcity of resources. So in a way, the planning of how to use technology and for what needs to be done, having clear in mind what are the limitations, not only the financial limitations, not the financial limitations, but the resources limitation. So here is, I think, where the whole challenge lays, to identify from a governmental perspective, but also from a private actors' perspective, what are the areas in which we do need AI to develop, to address some of the SDGs, and in which areas we don't want to use AI, for example, or we can use other resources to tackle the SDGs.
Okay, thank you. Another question by Julia Mönig. What about the sustainability of patents themselves? Aren't they the opposite of sustainable because others can't use the results? And isn't there the danger that they might reinforce or reproduce global inequalities? For example, your slide on distribution.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Aren't they the opposite of sustainable? I don't know exactly if they are the opposite of sustainable, but they definitely have some of the weaknesses that this question is highlighting, and I was highlighting as well in my presentation. So the fact that they exclude others from using an invention is, on the one hand, is seen as the mean to provide reward for innovators and then to incentivize them to innovate. But then on the other hand, as it was correctly highlighted, this might stifle innovation, especially when it's about AI and data-driven innovation that is maximized when it's actually shared between actors. And this is one of the reasons why we are trying to develop this framework in order to see whether there are other options that are more sustainable and then can direct innovation towards sustainability. And yes, if it stays like this, the problem might be that some inequalities might be reinforced.
Thanks for your answer to that. Next question is from Shivam Gupta. So how was the no negative or minimal negative impact monitored and validated for database projects in the database?
So basically, at the moment where the research was done, we looked at news and publicly documented reports concerning these projects. So obviously, it's not an absolute certainty of no negative or minimal negative impact. It is mostly based on the publicly available resources. So if there was no evidence publicly published about negative impacts, we would consider it as matching with the inclusion criteria.
Okay, thank you. So if I may jump in here with a slightly different, or what popped up in my head when I followed your presentation. Also, I don't know if you have any information about that, but I was wondering, how do AI projects fare in comparison to more conventional non-AI based projects to address the SDGs? Is there some way to compare them, or do you know something about that?
Well, I can give you an insight from our survey. So one of the questions concerned the fundings. So the question was, I don't remember the exact formulation, but it was about whether it would have been easier or more difficult to obtain the funding if the AI was involved in the project or not. And the majority of the projects answered that it was easier to obtain the funding because of the use of AI. So this is just one aspect, but this was addressed by the survey in this sense. Now, also, we asked other questions in the survey concerned whether AI was used to achieve more accuracy, more speed, and whether the projects actually achieved it. Achieved more speed, more accuracy, and so on because of AI. The answer was positive. And also one of the questions concerned whether they would use the AI approach again if they could decide, or they would change, and whether the AI was actually crucial to their objective. And the answers were positive in terms of AI. So yeah, both of them were positive. They would use again the AI approach, and it was crucial, the use of AI for the achievement of the object of the project.
Thank you. I have a few questions still on my list, but we unfortunately we've run out of time. So now it's exactly 12 o'clock. I hope there will be some time and space to pick up on one or the other issue in the course of the conference. Now I want to thank everyone for all the speakers, all the contributors, for participating this morning. I really enjoyed hosting this morning session, and enjoy your lunch break. And the next talk will then start at 1 o'clock. So thanks everyone again, and see you soon.